Start. Perfect. Perfect. Okay. So welcome. I want to give an official welcome to unique figures of Judaism. So tonight is very interesting. We're going to learn about converts. That's tonight's theme. We're going to learn about actually three converts throughout our Jewish history. And I just want to give an introduction to this whole course before we start. It's as it says in the name, it's a unique course. Usually we teach, we learn about a specific topic in the Torah and Judaism, or a certain group of topics, a certain theme. This kind of course is not so much a theme, it's not so much a study. It's a lot of storytelling. It's a lot of history. Of course, we're gonna learn a lot of things along the way. We're gonna learn a lot of little snippets of information, whatever's relevant to to the story. But the main thing is to learn the story, to learn to come to appreciate our history, and not only learning information but coming to appreciate it and coming to come to a better level of of excitement and appreciation for Judaism, for our history. So before we start with the stories, so I have here on the top of the page, I have two sections, which is on the Jewish approach to conversion. So let's talk a couple minutes about that before we get into the story. So, in many other religions, there's a focus on bringing more people into that faith. Drawing other people, having them convert or baptized or whatever the word would be. In Judaism, we don't have that emphasis. We're not looking to bring other people in. That's not a focus. On the other hand, if someone is interested and someone is very sincere, then that option is open. It is available to them. Another thing, I think, another difference that there is between Judaism, converting to Judaism or Judaism in general, and many other religions, is many other religions it's mainly connected with the faith. All the co-religionists, are all connected. They share the same faith. Many times there's also practices, observances that are related, but the big thing is about the faith and also the observances. In Judaism, of course, we have our faith and we have tons of observances and mitzvahs and commandments, but it also goes beyond that. It says the Jewish nation entered a covenant with God, and that's something. It became part of something that the Jewish nation has a certain kind of identity. So it's not just about our faith or about our behavior or our observances, but it's also there's a certain thing about our identity that we're different in a certain way. We're Jewish, and even if someone's Jewish, even if not necessarily they're even if they don't totally fully engage in their as you might call a religion, but they're still Jewish. It's part of the identity.
Well, what happens if they're engaged in something that's inappropriately Jewish?
Okay, so that's we want to work on that. We want to grow from there, but that's still their identity. That's still what they are. Now the question is, what happens if someone was not born Jewish and they convert to Judaism? So how do they have that Jewish identity? How does that happen?
The law.
Okay, so the answer is that it happens. There's a certain change when someone converts. There's actually an expression in the Talmud that when someone who's non-Jewish converts to Judaism, it's almost like a new child was born. There's that expression in the Talmud. Of course, it's in very specific. I mean, it's referring to very specific things, but there's that certain sense of a new identity. But at the same time, it's very difficult for someone to change his identity. How does that happen? So for that, we have our first reading. We'll go around and we'll take turns reading.
Okay. Isn't
yeah.
That, well, I don't know. I had a quick question. I'll come up with it.
Yeah. Okay, I'll get back to it.
Yeah.
Okay, so this doesn't have a number on it. This is just the first paragraph before text one.
Before text one? Where it says requirements or before that?
The one before that.
Would you like me to start it?
Sure, yeah, I guess Lee will go first and then we'll.
All right. If I'm not speaking loudly enough so they can hear, let me know. Gentile or convert? Rabbi Chaim Yosef David Azulay said from Gimel, that's third, okay? The Talmudic uses the precise language of a convert who converts and not a Gentile who converts, to hint to it that our sages teach that when we received the Torah at Mount Sinai all those years ago, the soul of the convert who would join us only many generations later was already present. This soul was at the incredible event at Mount Sinai, although its actual joining our people was deferred until now.
Beautiful. So in a certain sense, when we're talking about a person, a non-Jewish person who converts to Judaism, and we're talking about their they're getting this Jewish identity, it's not really something which is new. It's really something which they had. In a certain sense, of course, they weren't fully Jewish yet, but in a certain sense, there's a part of them was already Jewish. There's already the person was already at Mount Sinai. Their soul was already at Mount Sinai. That's why one second. That's why the language in the Talmud it uses the word when it refers to such a person. It says a convert who converts instead of a human being or a non-Jew who converts. It says the word a convert who converts because even before they converted, that's already part of their identity. Yeah.
My understanding is that when a non-Jew converts to Judaism, they are regarded as if they were always Jewish, and there's no new identity. It's that their identity
Right.
goes
So
back
yeah,
to
in a
Jew.
certain so that's the point that we're making. In a certain sense, their Jewish identity was there. Of course, they weren't actually Jewish,
Well,
but a certain part of their identity, right? Their identity, it was always Jewish in a certain sense.
God willing to be Jewish, they've been always Jewish.
Right.
I heard a rabbi say they have a Jewish soul.
Right. Yeah, I guess you could use that language.
Okay.
Yeah. So what of course, when someone is converting, of course there's they're coming to accept the Jewish faith or Jewish religion, and of course to accept the Jewish observance. So of course there's a lot of learning. They gotta learn the faith, they gotta learn all the details of what they're getting themselves into. But beyond that, there's also specific kind of, I guess, a certain ceremony that is done. And interestingly enough, the source for all these things is actually because the Jewish nation as a whole, when we went into that covenant with Mount Sinai, when we, so to speak, became Jewish for the first time, we went through these same three things that are part of the ceremony. And those things, we all did that, as a nation. Every person did that. And going forward, those are the things that, for every individual throughout history that became part of the Jewish nation, those three things are done. So we're gonna read that. That's the second paragraph. Who wants to I guess we'll start with Steve.
Yeah. Ramba, Mishnah, Torah, Israeli. By him. When the Gentiles desire to enter into the covenant, take shelter into the wings of the divine presence and accept the yoke of the Torah. You must undergo circumcision, immersion, and offering of a sacrifice. And a woman who converts must undergo immersion and bring a sacrifice.
Yeah, so that's just a very short snippet.
What's immersion?
Immersion is go into a body of water.
The
Right.
mikvah?
Exactly, the mikvah. Yeah, there's many details in each of these things. Those are all discussed in other parts of this book. I'm just giving the short quote.
In Christianity, it's baptism underneath the River Jordan, if you don't mind me saying that. And that's where the baptism comes in for us Christians. John the Baptist, he started the immersion part.
And what can the sacrifice?
So nowadays we don't do sacrifices at all. We don't have the temple. So nowadays it's only two. It's only in other words, the sacrifice is skipped.
What was
So-
going on?
Before when?
What was going on before?
It was animal sacrifice. Yeah. animal was slaughtered and it was burned on the altar, parts of it.
Now, take note here of the word yoke. Christians use that, meaning they're
Oh, really?
obligated. But yoke to the Torah, I think that somehow the attitude is that it's actually a blessing of the Torah.
Of course, it is a blessing, but we're not going to kid ourselves that it's also a responsibility. It's also it's a commitment, especially if someone is voluntarily making that commitment. So it's a commitment. Yeah. Of course, it brings major blessings. It's not a question. Okay, so that's just a very short, introduction, just to get ourselves familiar with the concept of conversion. And now we could go into our first story. So this is the story of a man named Onkelos, at least today, and in the second part of his lifetime, he was called Onkelos. So this actually, since this is from so far in time, so far back in time, we have many Jewish sources. The Talmud talks about this individual. So this man was born at the beginning of the Common Era, in the first century, sometime around there. So what was going on in Jewish history at that point was, many of the Jews were not living in Israel anymore. Israel was controlled by the Roman Empire. There's a lot of oppression to the Jews. During that century is when the destruction of the Second Temple happened, which I mentioned before. That was during that century, and there's a lot of other kinds of oppression. They didn't like Jewish observances. They didn't want that to happen too much. So there's all kinds of things going on. And one of the Roman emperors, his name was Hadrian. That was his name. And sure enough, he had a nephew who at a certain point converted. It's his sister's son. So let's just call him Onkelos. Let's just I'm not sure if I don't recall if he had another name earlier. So
He was in Israel?
so he grew up in Rome.
Okay.
Yeah, he was part of the royal family.
Okay.
His uncle was the emperor, you can imagine. He had all kinds of privileges, and he had all kinds of access to whatever was going on in the royal throne. So Onkelos was born as a very smart man. He was blessed intellectually, and he did a lot of studying. Of course, Rome was practiced another religion, but he did a lot of studying and a lot of reading. And at some point, he came to the conclusion that he decided on his own that he wants to become Jewish. He for some reason he decided he appreciates Judaism. He wants that to be his life's mission. He wanted that, that's what he wanted from himself. Of course, it wasn't easy for him to make that conversion, to make that change, considering where he was and his background. So he was always looking for the right opportunity and the right plan. And one day he decided, he went to his uncle and he said, "Listen, I spent, the beginning of my life doing a lot of studying, a lot of reading, but I realized, like, how's this going to help me? I need to go into the world. I need to go into business. That's what I want to do." So, of course, this man is the emperor. He has all kinds of, very rich man, of course, all kinds of treasures that he has. So Onkelos tells his uncle, "I want to go into business. Do you have any advice for me? Well, what's a good business to go into? Where should I start off?" So, of course, Hadrian felt very kind of flattered that my intelligent nephew is asking my advice. He felt good about it. He tells him, "I think you should," and this is a key. This we'll see then at the end of the story. He tells him your business should be, you should get into things that are cheap. People don't realize the real value of things of this thing. You should get it for cheap, and then you'll sell it. You'll make a profit out of it. You'll teach people the value of it and make a profit. So Uncleus took that advice. Of course, he got a big investor. He had his the emperor of Rome himself was his investor. He gave him a nice chunk of money, and he left. And of course, he went straight to Israel, straight to Jerusalem, and he converted right away. That was his first thing. We learn about the different teachers that he had, different sages in the Talmud or in the Mishnah. Those were his teachers.
Well, what means is, did he convert?
All the things that we mentioned before. He met up with the rabbis, and he studied. He already knew a lot, but he studied whatever else was done. He went to the mikvah. He did his circumcision. Of course, he didn't do the sacrifice because the temple wasn't around anymore. And became Jewish.
But Rome was on the European continent, wasn't it?
Right, Italy.
And then Israel was on the Asian continent.
Right.
So it's just amazing to me how people got everywhere.
Yeah, I don't know. It must have.
Conquered the whole world at that time. That's crazy.
Yeah. There was a lot of kingdoms that
Yeah.
history is very interesting. As soon as Uncleus was very excited. He finally is Jewish, and he just devoted his entire life to studying. He studied Torah all day and all night. One of the big things that he did, and this is why he's probably famous, is he translated the entire Torah, the entire 5 books of Moses, that, as we call it, the Old Testament, that some people call it. He translated into Aramaic.
Oh.
In most chumashes that's printed, he's the one who translated it. And the reason why that was done is because unfortunately it was needed. The Jewish nation, many people had forgotten Hebrew or a lot of Hebrew, and they had a hard time studying. And you think about it today, everything is translated, and if it's not translated, you just punch it into Google or something, and you get a translation. Back in the day, someone had to sit down and translate it.
Yeah, that's right.
So he was the first one to do it, and of course, when you're dealing with the text like the Torah, so you have to, it's a lot of work. It's not just translating the words; you also have to figure out the meaning. You have to have a authoritative translation. So of course, you need a big scholar to do that. So this is a big work that Uncleus did. Now, sure enough, what happened was a big surprise is that his uncle eventually found out what happened. It wasn't too easy you couldn't really hide from the emperor of Rome. So he figured out this nephew of mine, instead of going into business, he actually converted, and this was major. He was kind of like a big offense, especially for considering his royal family. So, of course, the first thing he sent out a whole group of soldiers to go track him down, go down to Israel, track him down, and bring him over, bring him down or bring him up, I guess, northwest to Rome. And so the first group of soldiers, they managed to track him down, and he somehow, I don't know how he pulled this off, he managed to do some sweet talking, and he managed to get them into conversation. And the whole group this is what the Talmud says, the whole group of soldiers ended up converting themselves.
Whoa.
So of course, that didn't go too well for the emperor. So he sent over a second group. This time he told them that he heard what happened. He heard that he started talking with them. So he told the second group of soldiers, listen, I want you to track down get my nephew again, but don't get into any conversations. Just do your job.
Don't let him talk to you.
So Uncleus, when he was approached by the second group, he still figured out a way to engage them in conversation. He said, I know you can't have a conversation, but I'm just going to ask you one question. He asked them a question as follows, and he says, you're coming from Rome. You guys are, simple soldiers. So you're carrying the torch, right? You're serving the officer, right? And then the officer on top of you carries the torch for the captain, right? And there's many different levels, and there's general, and then it goes all the way back to the emperor. But let me ask you the question, who does the emperor carry the torch for? Like, who is he serving? And of course, they, it was only one question, so they answered the question. They said, he's in charge. The emperor is in charge. He doesn't have to carry a torch for anyone. He's the highest authority. So Onkelos told them, I just want to point out something when it comes to Judaism. It says that God carried the torch for the Jewish nation. Of course, God is, of course, the highest, and he was carrying the torch for the Jewish nation. Now, what is he referring to? So for that, we're going to read text number 1 to get ourselves a background. So this is going back to Exodus, when the Jews left Egypt. They're traveling through the desert. It says that God lit up the way for them during the nighttime. I guess we'll go around the table. I guess Victoria, want to read for us?
The pillar of fire leading the way for the Jews in the desert at night. Exodus 13, 17, 22. It came to pass when Pharaoh let the people go, that God did not let them by the way of the land of the Philistines, for it was near, because God said, lest the people reconsider when they see war and return to Egypt. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to cause it to lead them on the way, and at night in a pillar of fire to give them light. They thus could travel day and night. He did not move away the pillar of cloud by day or the pillar of fire at night from before the people.
Wow. So of course this continued for the entire travels, right? The Jews were in the desert for 40 years, but they weren't traveling every day of those 40 years. But over that entire period, there was a supernatural pillar of fire that God himself, so to speak, carried the torch for the Jewish people. So this is the point that Onkelos was making to the soldiers. And of course, they were very impressed. And that led to more conversations. And sure enough, as you may have guessed, the second group also converted. And right, Hadrian tried again. He sent the third group. And this time he told them even more strict. He said, don't get into any conversations and don't even talk to him. No words. Just walk in there and take him. And I want to see him here. So that's what they did, of course. However, they finally so they get into Onkelos, wherever his house was. They start swapping him out, and he was all excited. He had this exciting. He was very happy. He had this happy look on his face, and on the way out of the door, he kissed the mezuzah, which is, it's common. This is what many Jews do. When you pass through the mezuzah, you kiss the mezuzah. So at this point, the soldiers, they couldn't contain themselves, and they had to ask him, "What are you doing? Like, what are you kissing this thing on the wall?" They just had to ask him. Of course, they were disobeying their commands, but that's what they did. And also, they were kind of confused with this whole attitude. Anyone else would have been kind of scared. Of course, the emperor is summoning you because you did something, because he's not happy with you. Chances are you're not going to come out from there alive. So why are you so happy? So Onkelos answered. He says, "I'm actually laughing. I'm actually laughing that the emperor is foolish. He's sitting there on his throne. He thinks that he has everything under control. On the other hand, in Judaism, we know that Hashem is our king, and on the same time, even though he's the king, he watches us. He protects us wherever we go. And that's, of course, that's the mezuzah. The mezuzah is a sign of God's protection, and that's why I was kissing the mezuzah. And as you may have guessed, sure enough, this has also made a strong impression. This concept also made a strong impression on this group of soldiers, and eventually, they also converted. And we'll see soon what happened. What ended up happening in the story. But let's look at text number 2 to learn a little bit about this mezuzah. What exactly Onkelos was referring to with the protection.
Rabbi says it is a mitzvah to place the mezuzah in the handbreadth adjacent to the public domain. The Gemara asks, what is the reason for this? Rav Hanina from Surah says, it is in order that the mezuzah protect the entire house by placing it as far outside as one can.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a long text.
Oh, the Gemara, Rabbi Hanina says, come and see that the attribute of flesh and blood is not like the attribute of the Holy One. Blessed be he. The attribute of flesh and blood is that a king sits inside his palace and the people protect him from the outside. Whereas with regard to the attribute of the Holy One, blessed be he, it is not so. Rather, his servants, the Jewish people, sit inside their homes, and he protects them from the outside. As it is stated, the Lord is your keeper, the Lord is your shade upon your right hand. In the Psalms 21, 121, 5. Rashi, upon your right hand, this refers to the mezuzah, since the mezuzah is to be placed on the right side of the doorway from the perspective of the one entering the house.
Right, so when it says God is the Lord is your shade on your right hand, it's referring to the mezuzah, which is on your right hand. So this just gives us some background. So this quote actually is from a different section of the Talmud, but the same exact quote is found in that story, in our story that we're learning from Onkelos, the same exact quote.
I have one question though. It's supposed to be as close to outside as possible.
Right.
What does that say about mezuzahs on the doors inside the house? Is that valid?
Of course, of course. If you look in the Shema, right? The Shema says, you should write them on the doorposts of your house and upon your gates. And that's the language.
Okay.
So doorpost of your house is the outside door, and then any other gates, any other rooms that you have. So both of them are important. And back in those days, the reason why we're talking about the hand's breadth closest to the outside is because buildings many times were very, very thick walls. I mean, if you go up till today, if you go to Israel in certain places, they have these ancient buildings that are, the wall is 4 feet wide. So that's where you have to put the mezuzah closer to the outside. In today's doors, you look at over there, it's just a little glass. So, the inside and the outside, it's very close to each. So getting back to our story, just to finish off. So Emperor Hadrian realized he's gonna have to try a different tactic because trying by force, sending soldiers is not working. So he decided he made a vow to himself, I'm not gonna punish this man. I can't harm him either way. So I'm not even gonna try. And sure enough, for whatever reason, Onkelos decided on his own. He decided to visit. He just showed up in Rome. He went to the emperor, and Hadrian right away asked him, "What were you thinking? Why did you convert to Judaism? Like, out of all things, Jewish people. I know I know what's going on with the Jewish people. I'm not treating them very nicely. Why are you joining the Jewish people?" So Onkelos told him, and this goes back to the beginning of the story. He says, "Listen, I listened to your advice. You yourself advised me that I should invest in something which is cheap because people don't appreciate the value of it." That's exactly what he did. He said people, around the world don't appreciate what Judaism is. And I invested in that, and I'm there to teach them. I'm there to share that with everyone else.
I'm curious about Onkelos's place in history because there have been other Jewish converts which we're really not all that proud of, like Maccabees. And they've done a lot for Israel, but there's a lot of things they've done which are really not that kosher.
The Maccabees were converts.
Oh, yes.
Okay, I was not aware of that.
Oh, okay, yeah.
All of them, or some of them?
No.
Okay, I'm gonna look into that. That's very interesting. Throughout history, there are tons. There's many converts. We're just our class tonight. I think we're taking random selections of people that had interesting life and that are less known. I think that's the idea. So that is the story of Onkelos the convert. I mean, until today, his work on the Torah, his translation of the Torah is considered very, very important. Sure enough, there's actually Judaism. Of course, we read the Torah portion every week in the synagogue, but there's also every person there's a Jewish law that every person should do their own kind of homework. They should study the portion on their own before Shabbat starts. And the law is to read it. We should read the portion. You should read the verse in Hebrew. Should read each verse twice in Hebrew and once with Uncle List's translation. Until today, I do that every week. That's how I do it. So just to give you an idea of how important his work was. Okay, so now we're going to move on to a very different kind of story. This is about 1,000 years later. And this is a story about, we call him Ovadia, the convert. He wasn't born as Ovadia. Of course, Ovadia is a Hebrew name. Ovadia actually there's a prophet Ovadia who himself was a convert. So possibly this is why he ended up choosing the name Ovadia, but he was born with the name Johannes, if I pronounced that correctly. He was from a Norman family. This is in the beginning of the 1100s, or possibly the end of so he converted at 11. I think the year was 1109 is when he converted. So he was born at the end of the 1000s. So this is again drawing the scene of Jewish history. This is the time of the Crusades. There's at that time Israel was in control of was in Muslim control, and they decided the Christian community decided to free the Holy Land of Muslims. They called it the Crusades, but on the way they made it. I'm not sure if it was on purpose, but what ended up happening was on the way they went to kill a lot of Jews. Thousands and thousands of Jews were killed. So this Johannes was, of course, in a Christian family. His father was part of the Crusades. His father possibly killed many Jews. Whatever. His father was definitely part of the Crusades. He had a brother who was also he was a fighter type. This Johannes himself didn't seem like he was that kind of type. He was more studious. He was more in the books. He was actually studying to become a priest. That was like his upbringing. We don't know exactly what was the motivation for him to convert. Again, I'll just give it. I'll skip to the end. The way we know the story about this particular convert, of Ovadia the convert, is from his own diary. But we don't have the full diary. He wrote a very short kind of diary of himself, and it was found in the it's called the Cairo Geniza. In Cairo, Egypt, there was an old synagogue. There's a lot of old manuscripts that were found there. So his diary, parts of his diary were found over there. So he didn't write that much. So we don't know. We don't know the reason, the specific reason why he decided to convert. It could be many different things together, or possibly he might have seen, with these crusades happening, he might have seen, Jewish people being murdered. That might have been part of the impression that he got. Possibly he came to the conclusion based on the studying that he was doing. He was studying to become a priest, so that might have been another thing. Either way, at some point he decided he wants to convert. He wants to become a Jew, and his family was his surroundings and his family was definitely not encouraging of that. So what he decided to do was to travel to somewhere else. So at that time, there was a big Jewish community in Syria. Aleppo, Syria, there was a big Jewish community. He traveled to Syria, very far away from where he was. He was in either in Italy or possibly in France. He definitely spent a lot of time in Rome. So, with the priesthood. So he traveled very far away from there. He traveled to Syria, and there he met with a big rabbi who we know about. His name was Rabbi Baruch ben Yitzchak, the big rabbi in Syria, and this rabbi converted him. He became a Jew. What was very interesting is that once he became a Jew, he was constantly on the move. He's always traveling. Every few years, he moved to a different city, and he moved all over the place. He moved in all across like Africa and Morocco, all these different places where there were Jewish communities. He moved all over. He moved to many of these places. He lived. He was in Lebanon. He was in Syria. He was in many other cities. At one point, he ended up, apparently towards the end of his life, he ended up in Egypt. That's why his diary was found in the Cairo,
Oh, yeah.
in the Cairo,
Makes sense, yeah.
in Cairo. He was in Iraq. He spent a while in Iraq. In Baghdad, there was a big Jewish community at that time. Somehow he managed to, I mean, maybe he did some investments, or I don't know, maybe he did Bitcoin or something. And he managed to he managed to make some money, and he was very generous. He supported a lot of Jewish causes and supported the Jewish needy people that were in Baghdad. So we know that he was in Egypt. He made it to Egypt in the year 1121. He'd already been Jewish for about 12 years at that point. Very interestingly, he writes in his diary that on his way to Egypt, I guess he must have passed through Israel, he met a Jewish man named Shlomo HaKohen, who proclaimed that he was the Mashiach.
Oh,
There were many of those, of course. I mean, there's a few more famous ones, but there were many such people throughout Jewish people. And of course, Ovadia himself, he himself was a convert, but he knew enough to understand that he's not the real thing. I mean, one of the big things that he told him was that you're calling yourself a Cohen. You know that Mashiach is not a Cohen. Mashiach is from the tribe of Yehuda, of Judah. Mashiach is a descendant of King David, which is not a Cohen. So that's like a dead giveaway. Like you can't be Mashiach. Eventually, he settled in Cairo, and we don't know much of his life story. He must have had a very colorful life. But what is very interesting is some of the documents that we have from him, some of the writings that we have. So of course we have this kind of short biography, a short diary that we're referring to, but we also have different songs. He wrote different like poems and songs. I guess he was into that. And what's very very interesting is that these songs were written with notes, but the kinds of notes that he used were whatever, like I don't know if they're used today, but like these Christian, they're used by the priesthood, these kinds of notes. And for many years, I mean, until someone made the connection, people saw these manuscripts. They had no idea which Jewish person would use Christian notes. He's writing in Hebrew with Christian notes. Like, how does that make any sense? But now looking at this person's life story, we can understand why he was doing that. I guess he was musical, and he definitely had that background. He was trained to be a priest, but he wanted to write a Hebrew song, a Hebrew poem, but the only way he knew how to express himself was with those kinds of notes. So actually, there's actually a website. I wrote down the website. For some reason, I don't know who made this website, but there's a website just about this man called johannesobadiah.org. And on that website, you have all these manuscripts. Actually, I can show you a picture. Let's see if I can show you a picture. Oh, I'll show it after. I didn't plug it into the screen, but I'll show it after. So we have these manuscripts, and you can see that some of it is faded, but you can see these little notes. So let's along the lines of the story, let's read text 3 and 4. So in the beginning of right, when we read about how he arrived in Syria, and I just said it very quickly how Rabbi Yitzchak of Aleppo, Rabbi Yitzchak ben Baruch of Aleppo, Syria, converted him. Before he converted him, tried to dissuade him. That's that's kind of the official process. That's the way the rabbis are encouraged to do it. So this is text number 3. I think Dave. You want to read for us number 3, text 3?
What is the procedure when accepting a righteous convert? When one of the Gentiles comes to convert, we inspect his background. If an ulterior motive of conversion is not found, we ask him, why did you choose to convert? Don't you know that the present era Jews are afflicted, crushed, subjugated, strained, and suffering comes upon them? If he answers, I know, would it be that I be able to be part of them? We accept them immediately.
So going back to the story, for him, he must have seen this firsthand, how Jews are under, Jews are in suffering. His own father, his own family were killing Jews. So he was definitely aware. That was definitely a good question to ask him, and he nonetheless decided to convert. So just goes to show his I guess his sincerity.
I'm curious, what would be an ulterior motive for conversion?
So the most common example is for marriage. Let's say he wants to marry a Jewish girl, or vice versa.
So that's an ulterior motive.
Yeah. Because he's not really interested in Judaism. He's just interested in
Yeah, they're not
person.
interested.
Yeah.
Interested, yeah. It's just to, yeah.
I mean, there could be other kinds of motives. Maybe there's all kinds of conspiracies. Maybe the Jews are rich, so I want to be rich. Or whatever it is. There could be all kinds of.
What you said applies to one who wants to marry a Jewish woman.
Right.
Okay, what
Right.
about Ruth? That's a different situation.
Right. I know that it's discussed. I don't have an answer on the spot, but I know that it is discussed. A good question. Oh, okay. Now text number 4 is not directly related to the actual story of this convert, this Ovadia, but it's connected to the we mentioned the Crusades. So along those lines, let's read about the concept of sanctification of Hashem's name. I'll read this one. This is text number 4. Again, this is from the Rambam. I like quoting the Rambam. He's and for those who came to my classes before, you probably read from the Rambam before. The Rambam he lived actually around the same time period as that we're talking about, maybe 100 years later, and he basically wrote an encyclopedia of Jewish law. That's basically what it is. So that's usually the easiest place for me to find things. So he writes like this: the entire house of Israel are commanded regarding the sanctification of God's great name, as Leviticus states, and I shall be sanctified amidst the children of Israel. What is implied? Should a Gentile arise and force a Jew to violate one of the Torah's commandments at the pain of death, he should violate the commandment rather than be killed. Right? So that's generally, we want to protect our life generally. When does the above apply? With regard to other mitzvahs, with the exception of the worship of other gods, forbidden sexual relations, and murder. However, with regards to these 3 sins, if one is ordered to transgress one of them or be killed, one should sacrifice his life rather than transgress. So yeah, unfortunately, this is not only a law in the books, but this has actually happened in practice for thousands and thousands of Jews throughout history. Whether it was Christianity or Muslim or any other religion, everyone was killing Jews at one point throughout history. They would give the person the ultimatum: either accept a different religion, give up Judaism, or die. And many Jews died. Many Jews died that way. The Crusades was was a big example of that, because that was the whole idea. The reason why they were killing, of course, the reason why they wanted to kill Jews, it wasn't just for murder. They didn't want people who had a different religion. So they were giving the Jews a choice, either accept our religion, but Jews didn't take that choice, and instead they were ready to die. So that's with regards to that story. It is a rather short story, but definitely interesting, especially the fact that he wrote these Jewish songs with Christian notes. So now moving on to our third and last story for tonight. This is a man known as Avram of Vilna. This is much more recent, only about 300 years ago. This is a man who lived in Poland. Now, I want to say that there are many different versions of the story. So I don't want to get into too many details because I don't know how many of the specific details are true, but the general outline of the story is definitely true. It was written, we have here, this is the earliest source of this. This is in text number 5. So this is the basic details. This is from Rabbi Yaakov Emden. He wrote this in 1755, which is just about 5 years after the story would have happened. So that's definitely so whatever he writes here is definitely accurate. I'll ask Steve.
Jacob, is that Rabbi Yaakov?
Yeah, Yaakov is Jacob. Yeah,
Jacob?
yeah.
Thank you. Do you want to read it?
Yeah, please.
Yes, sir. Text 5, a few years ago, it happened in Vilna, the capital of Lithuania. That was a great friend from the family of the Popovska. And converted, they captured him and imprisoned him in many days, thinking they could return him to their religion. He knew that he would not escape harsh tortures and cruel death, and he would not return. They wanted to save him from the death and the punishment that would await him if he held out. He paid no attention to them or to the begging of his mother and the countess, and he would not be afraid or worried about dying in all the bitter anguish they had done to him. After waiting for him for a long time, they tried to take it easy on him for the honor of his family. He ridiculed all the temptations of the priests who would speak to him every day because he was an important minister. He scorned them and laughed at them and chose death for long and cruel agony to a temporary life of this world. He accepted the suffering all from them from love, and he died sanctifying God's name. May he rest in peace.
Wow.
Pretty good. Yes, this is different than the other stories that we read, where here we read how he was actually killed because of conversion. He ended up being killed.
Like a martyr.
What's that?
Like a martyr.
Yeah. So I don't want to get too much in the details because it's hard to know how much of it is accurate. I mean, there's actually a full book, like a 200-page book written about the story, and it's called, the name of the book is Avraham ben Avraham. If you want to look it up, because Avram is, of course, is the Jewish name that he chose. He chose the name Avraham, and every convert, of course, instead of tracing back to his non-Jewish parents, traces back to Abraham, the original first Jew. So his name was Avraham ben Avraham, Avraham the son of Avraham. So he grew up as part of the Pototska family. I actually looked it up. You could find them there's a whole Wikipedia page about this family. This is a very famous noble family in Poland or Lithuania. The borders kind of moved around in those years. For hundreds of years, it was like a known thing. The Potocki family was a very famous family. Many of the stories say how he was this man. He grew up. His name from birth was, I don't remember now. Um, Valentin. That was his Polish name.
Hmm.
The story was that he was an only child, and his parents sent him. They were I think they were Catholic. They sent him to like a special Catholic school, and well, they sent him actually to the city of Vilna, which at that time, I mean, today it's still it's a big city. There's half a million people that live in Vilna, but back in the day there was a very big Jewish community living in Vilna. In fact, the Talmud, the first like the most official edition of the Talmud in print was printed in Vilna. It's known as the Vilna edition. That's like the standard that we keep until today. So the story goes that while he was studying in the school in Vilna, he somehow encountered Jewish people. He had different questions about Judaism and managed to speak to some rabbis. And eventually he decided he wants to convert. And again, because of his background, his upbringing wasn't such a easy thing to do. So he decided to, I mean, there's different, there's different tales about how he ended up doing this, but he eventually went to Amsterdam in Holland. At that time, that was one of the only places that it was kind of more safe. There was less religious oppression, I guess you could say. No one's gonna go after him if he converted to Judaism in Amsterdam. So sure enough, he went to Amsterdam. He got a referral. He got a recommendation from the rabbi in Vilna where he studied. They sent a recommendation to the rabbi in Amsterdam, and he eventually converted over there. And now we're not sure why. But as we'll see, it didn't end up being a smart move. He decided to move back to Poland, back to Vilna area. He actually when he kept on moving around. So he spent a couple years in Amsterdam, studying Torah all day, and then he kept on moving around. So he ended up in a city outside Vilna called I get you the exact name of the city. It's like a suburb of Vilna.
Was it Vishnitz?
No, it was something with an L. Ilya or something.
Yeah. My grandfather was born in Vishnitz outside of Vilna.
Vishkinitz?
Yeah.
Okay.
In Lithuanian, they called it Wishniak, but in Yiddish, it was Vishnitz.
Okay, so what ended up happening was he ended up in this town. He would spend all day studying in the synagogue. And eventually there was another Jew, unfortunately, it was another Jewish person who kind of tattletaled on him. Because of course, at some point he disappeared. He was, he's growing up as a good Gentile, part of the royal family, and he just disappeared. So they were looking for him. And back in those days, it was hard to find people. If you just pick up without a trace, there's no way to find them. But there was another Jewish person who, because of his business, he had connections with Polish noblemen. So he was aware of the fact that, years back there was a missing person. And when he heard that he somehow figured out that this person was a convert. This person who spends all day studying in the synagogue is a convert. So somehow he put two and two together, and he tattletaled. Unfortunately, must have been something personal. He was upset at him for something. So he told the Polish authorities that I think this guy is the guy who went missing, this Jewish man. And they arrested him, and he right away admitted that it was him. He wasn't going to hide anything. He was very proud of what he did. And they tried to convince him. It was very embarrassing, especially for his parents, as part of the royal family. So they tried to convince him out of it. They tried to, get him to go back to his original faith, and he wouldn't hear of it. Eventually, they sentenced him to burning at the stake, and they burnt him. On the story goes that he was burnt on the holiday of Shavuos. On the second day of Shavuos, they just burnt him alive. There's all kinds of tales about how all kinds of like spooky things that happened to the people who killed him. But I don't know how many of the details are true, but there's all kinds of tales of, you know, there's like a building near where he was burnt. There was a building that got smoke on it, and the smoke would never go away. He always tried painting it, and it never went away. There's all these different kinds of tales, but the basic details of the story are definitely definitely true. And this again goes to show of this level of commitment and this level of connection to Judaism that this person had. You know, he literally gave up his life, and in more ways than one. He at first he was ready to leave behind all of his connections and all of his royalty and riches and whatever he would have had as an only child of a noble family. He's ready to give that up and instead just be a wanderer Jew, a wandering Jew. And then he literally was killed. He was killed because of that. He even when he was given the chance to, he was not ready to go back. Hopefully that we should never have to deal with these kinds of things. God willing, we should never have to deal with these kinds of sacrifices. But of course, there's always something to learn about our connection to Judaism. So that's that story. And we have a few more minutes. I just want to conclude with more of a Hasidic insight with regards to the concept of converting, a Gentile converting. So again, I didn't put numbers here. I'm sorry for that. This is the last. Right, the heading is in conclusion. So there's two different readings. Actually, I realized I skipped Lee.
Yeah.
So.
Want me to read that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Converts as the goal. From the Talmud, God exiled Israel among the nations only so that converts would join them. Who are the converts? Rabbi Dover of Lubavitch. Our sages taught that God exiled Israel among the nations only so that converts would join them. Beyond the literal meaning of actual converts, this teaching also has a deeper meaning that is relevant to every Jew. Our bodies and natural instincts are a blend of good and bad. Our natural condition from our youngest age is that we are controlled by our negative inclination in the spirit of the verse. Every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil and not good at all. However, we were created in the divine image. Our soul is a veritable piece of godliness. We are therefore empowered to transform our hearts and our natural instincts so they are devoted solely and truly to love and awe for God. We are also empowered to harness all of our thoughts and actions to this end, and thereby fully accept the divine yoke of Torah and mitzvot. When we accomplish this, we are converts, having transformed ourselves and completely accepted divine authority.
No, it's beautiful. So starting off with the Talmud, right? The Talmud kind of makes this shocking statement, which kind of sounds very different than what we were saying until now, right? We were talking before about how we're not looking for converts, and we try to discourage someone who wants to become Jewish. And here the Talmud says that the whole reason we're in exile for thousands of years, right? Ever since the destruction of the Second Temple, we're in exile. That's also we could have more converts. More converts should join us. So the way Hasidic teachings explain it is that it's talking about the converts within ourselves. The fact that we're in exile gives us the opportunity to engage with the parts of ourselves that could be converted, so to speak. The part of ourselves that is less than totally divine, so to speak. And we could take that and harness that and get that involved in our Judaism. That's making ourselves a convert, every single one of us. So I want to wish us all that we get the job done. So that way we'll get all the converts that we need. We'll all become the converts that we're supposed to be, so to speak.
Yeah.
And we'll get to leave this exile. Yeah. All right. So that's the end of tonight's formal discussion, formal part of tonight. And next week we're going to learn about 3 different rabbis, very different kind of very, very, very unique stories that rabbis throughout history experienced. So see you all there.
Thank you.
Is one of them named Rabbi Guerreri?
I wish.
Rabbi, I sent you the city where my grandfather was born. He pronounced the W with a V, Vishnitz. But the Russians pronounce it Wishniach. And my dad went to visit it during World War II, but it was already destroyed by the Nazis.
Oh, Vishnitz, of course. Of course. Until today, there's a big Hasidic group called Vishnitz.
So that's where my father's family was all from.
Wow.